see. So it's
Did you drive?
a fly.
Great. Well, I'm delighted that you're on this panel. I mean, sort of staff it, but I made the decision after one person brought it out. I said, "Oh, we got somebody here." So I met one of them last night. Brianna, she's
Yeah.
Eva, I think it will be. We didn't really get a chance to sort of talk through what we're going to talk about, but I'm not too concerned because I think that if all going well, you guys say it's good. I think a lot of stuff will come out. I love the idea of just starting by seeing what people think they're talking about when they're talking about generative AI, because it means many different things. And none of us, most of us have really very little understanding. We don't use this technology.
So you were in the office?
Yeah. So that's good.
Yeah.
So now that you're so you're done with USA, US, so what consulting?
Yeah, consultant. And so I work for a company that's consulting with science and
So we
technology.
see you.
So they're working on AI.
I guess that's amazing.
So you really will be interested to talk to Rihanna because she's really working on cybersecurity.
Okay.
And countermeasures. She's an academic, but she's also had, I mean, she's at the Stanford Center right now, but I think that she's done a lot of consulting.
Okay, great.
So I think that you two will be interesting.
All right, yeah, I look forward to engaging everyone. I've been meaning to respond to the email thread.
It's all good. You know, sometimes it's, you know, sometimes I find that we really need a lot of sort of background conversation, and other times when we have this much expertise, I feel like I should just set that. You know, the only trick is we have to get to that pivot where people start talking to each other.
Yeah.
Rather than, and if that happens, we're golden, right?
Yeah, I think for me, in addition to looking at AI, is the need in elections and democracy. Because I've been thinking about the U.S. government and their invasion of Iraq, and they're like, oh, they held elections, they're a democracy, right?
Yeah.
And so is elections just what we call a democracy?
There was a Paul Collier book about that a few years ago that was, I think, really kind of striking of, you know, that equation of like, if they're having elections, which are like these notorious violence triggers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
Yes, I don't want to lose that part of the potential for political violence and discussion about technology.
We have had panels at this meeting before about elections as atrocity triggers. But that was like 5 years ago. And we haven't combined it with the social media.
Yeah, because it's before elections, during elections, and after elections is how I envision the election process.
And this was, I mean, this I can explain. I mean, we came very close to talking to Maria to come back. She couldn't do it eventually. But this is for Rubaii right now. This is her entire research project. It's like the 2024 elections. So that's good.
Yeah, because it's going to set the course for the rest of the decade. And that's making me so nervous.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go check.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right, I'm really.
Yeah, I'm really excited about all the panels.
Me too. Thank you.
We were looking at standing in the middle. And, that, we're gonna start up a little later, because this might take 30 minutes.
Yeah, we'll start at like 9:15. I mean, it's like 7 minutes until 9 now. I'd like a quarter of people. Good morning, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. So, I wanted to introduce you to Heather.
Oh,
Who's,
hi, hello. We're on the same panel,
We're
I
on the same
believe.
panel, I was just
Yay.
talking about you two, and you two have, I think, a lot of overlap. So,
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you.
So Max, have we had a lot of
I am a consultant on security. Emerging technology issues.
That's awesome. Sorry, it's cold here.
Yeah. It's very warm.
Even though it's raining, I'm very confused.
That's how I was like, I don't know. It's just gonna be-
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. So what sort of aspects do you focus on specifically?
So right now, we just as responsibilities. And what that means for law enforcement agencies.
Oh,
And that's security others, sharing the responsibilities. So it touches on a full range of law enforcement and cybersecurity.
yeah. So our president's domestic, right? So Americans are-
Yes, international too.
Oh, right.
Overseas, so one thing that people have to realize is that they need to AI.
Okay, so this is my kind of feeling. I feel like we've been doing a lot of data collection and analytics, parsing and data analytics for a very long time. It's just that now we're using more AI and it's almost like.
No, they have been, and this situation,
Yeah.
they have been doing it.
Well, it's what I mean,
Yeah,
like,
but
we just like talk about it in that way, and then now all of a sudden people use the AI and they're like interest is exploded. And I've been doing this for a very long time,
Yeah.
guys, like.
And so surveillance technology and information exchange. That goes into the radar. And that's their capabilities. So I tell people that next day intelligence communication. Information.
So I came there, I would do that, like, especially in America.
Yeah.
Like,
America, maybe actually globally, that's how many people cross into the US.
True.
And shipments and all of that. That's responsible for.
Yeah, 20,000. Wow.
Yeah, and so that's like the radar, because just by being so close to the military aspect, like everyday experience.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, so I think all the ways in which people have, like, just collected on that and the ways. So much. Really, like, that's, you know, it's like always like, we're straight to like, AI, but it's just use. So then I check in. I was convinced like, there are the way in which the information because everybody.
Yeah.
But being subjected to a drone, like, people are like, I'm not really subjected to a drone. Why should I care? I'm like,
Well, domestic law enforcement agencies in the US are using drones. Surveillance operations, like in
in the
Baltimore.
US.
Yeah.
Really?
So I went to Baltimore and that was controversy about what are the responsibilities of law enforcement using drones to observe
Is that,
the city.
is that okay? Is that like lawful?
That was years ago before this. Popped up. And so they have continued to enter social infrastructure. So that's what's happening across the US, especially law enforcement social infrastructure. But they go like grants from DOD, Department of Defense, Department of Justice, and things there. Technical.
Using it like a trial.
Oh. Because one of the things I was doing at Cambridge years ago was engaging with our partners to encourage them to opt into HSs to do our information sharing. And so if you don't require a visa to enter the US, you're doing visa travel, and that requires a relationship with
It's even on Aussie, it's like, we're talking 5 hours.
Oh, yeah.
We still have to have it like in install, right?
And so those enjoy like the level of security isn't as high
Sure.
as for say someone coming from Sudan.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so it's easier for Australians who has people from their union. So that type of information sharing is happening. To deal with that type of
Yeah, ours is so easy. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I might, is that
that's what I was wondering.
yeah, that's very good. Let's see. I need to let my work on one monster.
And then I was looking at like in
I already have fairly like that. I have like 4 hours.
Just holler.
Like that was the complicated. Yes.
Little cuddle thing. You want me to get that?
I just wanted to say hello. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Hello. Good. Hi.
I saw you.
Oh, at the human rights, the lecture? Yeah, I had to sit on the floor, it was so crowded. I wasn't expecting She was amazing.
No, but Leo was telling me about it. I had class.
Yeah.
So, I would have loved to go.
I love
Did you read the book?
I want to. I didn't either. I know, I'm gonna buy your book.
Yeah.
New York Times. Yeah. Yeah, it was so.
Yeah.
Like you read so many books though.
I'll add it to my list.
Can I use my book? What's in my backpack? I also have a pretty good pink.
Oh, I have my LGMAP pen in here. That's hilarious.
And also, if anybody needs hand sanitizer, deodorant, hand cream, chapstick.
That's so cute. I was gonna bring deodorant, but I was in the car, and it's not. Someone's gonna bring it, and thank you for. Yeah.
You guys are like so prepared.
I feel like this is like women supporting women. Yeah.
Because last year I was like so sweet.
No, yeah, they're going back and forth. Yeah.
Oh, why do I have some?
No. It's me, because I got reaction.
Oh,
okay. I gave it to you because I didn't see yours and they looked at your thing.
I'm so confused. I was like, oh wait, they're both mine.
You look from the one.
Ask my collection.
I moved my collection. I opened this thing up. I was like, okay.
I literally use this notebook for like so many different things. Like, I'd like use it for ramping notes and lists, but then I also took the notes at the West Point conference. I have notes on things I'm writing. I've got like a massive stuff.
You tell us what I can see at the desk. It's so dusty.
No, mine, I like brushed mine off. I was like,
This is like my bag. And I have it back in the
Chloe, for classes, we just want to, like, whatever we take is in small class. For Chris. Yeah.
How are you?
Just double check before you don't need to do.
Good thing no you have, but yeah.
We have to be here. Yeah, he said show up to what, like 3 or 4 panels?
oh,
I mean, we'll be here for all of them.
yeah.
Yeah, so like,
I just didn't know if there was specific, I can't remember what he said.
Gotcha, yeah. And Samira was like, you guys should go, but I'm not giving you extra credit.
No, ours is just instead of doing reading, you're doing this.
Oh, that's fantastic though. Except I brought it up in class today because I wasn't there at the beginning of class. She left me all by myself. Also, what's up with check that? No.
I don't work everybody. I mean, we're short like 2/3 our audience, participants.
Yeah.
So they must be
When
voting, they're walking all and must be voting for the town clerk. So it's Harvey's, but Harvey can only say. Oh, right. I hope not, no, because a bunch of people from the hotel did it before.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's really good.
But Anna's great. I
Oh,
love
amazing.
Anna. Anna has an answer.
Anne knows so much.
She's brilliant.
Oh my gosh. I agree. I agree. When Anne's like, I don't know, like, I want to speak. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? And talk about the working class and Marxism, please.
Yeah, like I'm begging you. You know.
No, never. Or if you only go for one day.
But
It's like,
I wonder if he heard back from you.
it's not.
I don't know if Anne thinks that,
okay, it's like, okay.
Yeah. I was looking for Luca's name. I was like, which one was it?
I said she is doing. I mean, I'm not, but like, I feel like.
Oh, I didn't know she was running the Middle East study.
Chloe, Chris is gonna be here, he's moderating.
Yeah, both of us realized that at the same
Oh.
time.
He told me that. Well, we were just like, he's in what, Boston today? So we're like, is he?
He's in Worcester.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, so I was like confused. He's in Worcester?
Like the key.
In Massachusetts. Okay. Like, bro, I don't know what you're saying to me. I'm like, I know you're speaking words and they make sense to you, but I don't know what you're saying. Gotcha. Alright. Look at this one. Here's from the bank.
I would make a 32% UMAP certificate kids.
Go on.
That's a support, the extension of the support.
And
I
that's
love
only
like
half
how it's by the numbers. It's like,
Only 8%. Only 8%.
Are the masters?
Oh, gotcha.
Because there's only 7 of us, that's 1% per person.
Literally.
It's more than 1%.
Yeah, you know.
But like the other one
Wait,
is literally
what's the
a
other
minor.
one? Oh, it's a minor for
Not even a
undergrad?
major. It's a minor.
That's me too. I did that also.
Maybe 2%. I know. I think I'm like 3%. It was like 1.5.
It's true.
I'm like 3%. Wow.
You're doing well. So
Wow. You are the program.
I am. But now it's 10.3% of any calculations for critical mass and college graduation.
Well, wait, you by yourself, you guys revolutionary, James.
I know,
Well,
2.8% of
yesterday-
the population we can see like enough critical mass to cause social change.
So we're starting the whole today.
It's already started.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it started when you picked this up this morning.
Yesterday,
Back of the class. Front of the class.
Yeah, you want to really, yeah, we know. Kind of love that for you.
It's too late now.
We're just yapping.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but I just want to say that. I know, I'm not working.
Good, how are you?
Oh, good.
Cheers, I like it. Well, you know. Shots.
No, I thought it was you.
I'll talk about you, Chloe, but you don't even ask me questions.
I know so much.
I know.
We go. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to Binghamton University. I'm Harvey Stenger. I'm the president of Binghamton University, and one of my fun duties is to come and welcome people to events like this. This event is special in that it's not a conference. And Max and Carrie make it clear that this is a place where we're going to have conversations, we're going to be actively participating, because the topics, the issues, and the solutions that we seek are complicated. And one person standing at a podium doesn't really help you find the answers to that. It has to be a collaborative conversation. I also want to thank our recipient of the annual Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize. Is Frank here yet?
He's outside, he's coming in.
Well, we will recognize him when he comes in. Frank Mugisha, who is here. He's the founding executive director of Sexual Minorities in Uganda, and fought for rights for LGBTQ people in that nation, which has not been an easy task. And we hope someday we will be able to claim that we had a Nobel Prize winner before they were Nobel Prize winners participate in this, because last year we had a Nobel Prize winner participate in this conference that had just won a Nobel Peace Prize. So it's exciting. The Institute for Genocide Mass Atrocity Prevention was started in 2016. The first conference was in 2017. It really does stress practical methods of prevention and working towards steps to solve these difficult, we call them ugly problems in the world. And I'm really proud that I-GMAP is active in these issues. They're not just looking at history, they're looking at the future. We're also the first university, to my knowledge, to have a Master's of Science degree in Genocide Mass Atrocity and a solid enrollment in that program. And it's also a way for us to share ideas between institutions. The representation here from across the country is outstanding, and it allows us to spread the word. And when I think about the generous funding that we've gotten from our alumni and from our friends to support this institute, one of the things that they really insist on is that it's bigger than just here at Binghamton. And so some of the things that I think Carrie and Max will talk about is our Faculty Fellows program, which has dozens of fellows involved in it, not just from Binghamton, but across the country, and I think perhaps even some from out of the country. Yes. So that's quite a story. I'm sure you've heard about it, and Max and Carrie will talk about it a little bit more, see if we can recruit some of them here. But I really want to thank these two folks because they have done this work. We will always miss and remember Nadia. She was the first person that stood next to Max to bring this institute to its feet. And it's been a sad few years since we've lost her, but we know that wherever she is, she's probably really enjoying the success of the institute. And I'd like to have Max and Carrie take it from here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And guess what? I have another event to welcome people to. So have a great day. I'll see you tonight. Well, some of you tonight.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carrie Wiggum. I'm one of the co-directors of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. And on behalf of myself and my fellow co-director, Max Pensky, we want to welcome you to Binghamton University and to this 5th annual Frontiers of Prevention International Forum. I want to begin by saying that Binghamton University sits on the ancestral land of the Oneida and Onondaga nations, 2 of the 6 nations that constitute the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The Haudenosaunee existed as a participatory democratic society centuries before settlers arrived in what is today upstate New York. And since contact with settler society, the Haudenosaunee have actively resisted the forces of settler colonial genocide, which continue today. I want to extend my thanks also to Harvey, President Harvey Stanger, and the Provost Donald Hall, who will be joining us later this evening for the support, their support of I-GMAP and the whole support of the Binghamton University administration. Thanks so much for being here. We want to begin, Max and I, by acknowledging that something that's pretty obvious to those of us working in this field, that as we speak in this room about atrocity prevention, there are countless millions around the world who are struggling to survive because of the collective failure of humanity to prevent all atrocity crimes. And the horrific suffering in Gaza right now is only the most visible example of this reality, but there are so many other places around the world where atrocities have made daily life a living nightmare for civilians who are targeted simply because of who they are or because of who perpetrators believe them to be. Sudan, Ukraine, Venezuela, Myanmar, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Yemen, the list goes on and on. I-GMAP was created as an institute meant to build bridges and facilitate conversations among people working to bring an end to this violence, whether they be scholars, practitioners, or policymakers. And Frontiers of Prevention was designed to create a space for us to come together and have difficult conversations about where we have failed and also where we have succeeded and where the lessons that we've learned from those successes can help inspire action elsewhere. The suffering around us is so visible these days that it can be really hard to recognize the spaces where the work of key actors, many of them in this room, have led to building resilience rather than risk. And we hope these next 2 days can be a space to talk about both of these realities. We want to speak honestly about our failures, but we also want to speak and share what's working and what lessons we've learned that can help us build more resilience in the future. So thank you so much for being here to help us have these conversations. We're excited to see what comes out over the next 2 days. And now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Max to go over a few logistical details.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. For the students, it's great to see you, and I hope that you are able to stay for the entire event, which is cumulative for our panelists and other guests, many of whom have traveled great distances to be here. We're so grateful. And so it's great to see some familiar faces. It's great to see some new faces, and Carrie and I are tremendously looking forward to talking with you and hearing from you over the next 2 days. I'm going to do all the housekeeping talk now. So to begin with, I think I've told all you panelists this several times, but it's always worth saying one last time. This is not a conference. There are no prepared remarks. Nobody's going to be reading anything. PowerPoints are completely and utterly forbidden, and they're not tolerated. And we even, I should explain that, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic, Carrie and I really sat down and asked ourselves a simple question, which is, if you're flying home from a conference after having been gone from your family and your work for days, burning that jet fuel, what about the conference would tend to make you say, well, that was worth it, I'm glad I did it? And the simple approach was, why don't we do those things and not anything else? And so as a consequence, this is not a familiar venue. To make it, when it works well, it works extremely well. But in order for it to work well, it will have to require of the panelists to step out, I think, of their normal, maybe more comfortable way of doing these kinds of events and joining with us in this particular format. The forum is divided into 2 days and 7 panels. The panels are devoted to particular themes. In each panel, we've invited experts from academia and from civil society and government who bring various kinds of experiences, various kinds of expertise. And we've really thought hard about diversity of the panels, particularly in terms of not having too much overlap in expertise. So we're hoping that the conversation between and amongst the panelists is going to be the major thing that will generate more substantive conversation, new ideas, new perspectives, and will make the panelists able to say on the plane ride on the way home, well, that, apart from the glory of Binghamton, New York, that this was a worthwhile thing to do. So panelists, this really depends on you. It's not just permitted, but it's deeply, deeply encouraged for you to start asking one another questions in the panel, to respond even when the moderator has not actually asked you to say anything. That kind of spontaneity and that kind of participation is what we're after. Okay. So that's my comment about the format, which if you see it in the first panel, I bet you will. You'll get it. We will generally have our moderators will generally just very briefly introduce our speakers. Let me make sure I'm on time. And then maybe take a 1 or 2 minutes to sort of frame the panel for you. The speakers, the panelists will have at it. And then the moderator will, at some point during the session, maybe at the 2/3 mark or something, also begin to receive audience questions and put them in the mix. So for you in the audience, you're absolutely invited, and in fact, encouraged to raise your hand and ask a question or make a comment, usually somewhere around the halfway to 2/3 point of the session. Please note, all of you, that because this is a live streaming event as well, and we have an audience on the live stream that's actually larger than the audience in person, that we begin and end very punctually. So the times that you see on the schedule are the times that each session will begin and break, more importantly, will begin and will end. So please do use the program. We have printed versions of it for you out there. Use the program as a dependable guide for when you need to be back in your seat so that the next session can begin. Restrooms for this floor, you simply go out of either of these two doors, take a right, go through the glass doors, so they're outside of the atrium, and there will be restrooms there. There are gender-neutral restrooms on the 4th floor. And if you go out through those glass doors, again, you will see the elevator there that will take you to the 4th floor where there are gender-neutral restrooms. We've built in longer coffee breaks and longer lunches because when we did our forensic why do conferences suck exercise, one of the things we always discovered was there was not enough time to have a break, to talk to people. We felt rushed at our lunch. I would have loved to talk to X, Y, and Z. So we've built in, I hope, generous amounts of time for coffee breaks and lunches. I would encourage you to use them to sort of, buttonhole somebody who you don't know. But that's just me. Please note that today we have a more complicated schedule than tomorrow because, as President Stenger just indicated, we're very honored to have Frank Mugisha with us. Hello, Frank, who's now here in the house. Frank Mugisha is the second recipient of the Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize, following last year's inaugural prize, which was received by Filipino journalist Maria Ressa. We will, because of this venue will not be large enough for that talk, we will all be transferring from this downtown campus, which is very tiny, to the main Binghamton University campus, which is actually something like 4 miles, like 7 kilometers west of here. Now, the students know how to do this. There are shuttle buses. For the panelists, we have a bespoke bus for you. Not a party bus, I'm sorry to say, but regular seating. So, once we're done with our last coffee break here of the day, which will be at 4:30, we will gather out in the lobby, and we will have somebody lead you down the stairs to the front of the building, and you will be herded into the shuttle bus that will take you to Binghamton University's main campus, and there you'll be led into the lecture hall where Frank will be delivering his prize speech. That is at 5 o'clock. Okay. After that, you panelists, after the ceremony and the speech are concluded, you will be led back to the bus. You'll be taken back to the DoubleTree Hotel. You will have dinner on your own tonight, and you should have gotten a message from me with a whole bunch of options for dinner within less than 500 meters of the hotel. So if you want more suggestions or if there's anything that you need help with, please, by all means, don't hesitate at all to just grab Carrie and me and ask us for any help that you might need, and we're more than happy to do that. That's kind of why we're here. So with that, let me hand things back over to Carrie.
All right, I'm gonna do this. I have to do the obligatory thank yous, but also I really enjoy thanking and want to thank all of these people for making this event possible. The first is to Charlie Scheidt, who will be joining us later. Charlie's funding and the funding of the Scheidt Family Foundation have made Frontiers of Prevention possible, and we'll make sure to introduce him to you when he comes later today. I also want to thank Bailey Benninger, Laura Kipfer, and Vicki Griffin from the Provost Office, who have done a great deal to make the logistics of this conference work. Also, Yasho Ali and Tomi Adetunji, who have dealt with live streaming and the conference website and all of this. Thank you to them. Thanks to CIMENAS, the Center for Middle East and North Africa Studies, for helping organize one of the panels for this conference. Thank you to all of you panelists who have come from various places around the globe to Binghamton, New York. It's not the easiest place to get to, but we're so grateful that you're here. And thanks to all the students that I see in the audience. It's always wonderful to see the participation of our student body. And then just from a personal place, I would love to thank my colleague Max, who's really one of the greatest colleagues in the world. And he really does the heaviest lift relating to this conference. He's done the lion's share of the work, and I'm so grateful to be able to call him a colleague. So with that, we're at the end. We're a little behind, which we promised we wouldn't do, but this will be the last time we're behind schedule. So we'll take a little mini break of 1 to 2 minutes as we invite up all of the panelists for the first panel on LGBTQ+ rights and atrocity prevention. Hello, hello.
Very nice to meet you.
Wherever you want to sit. I'm gonna
I just.
sit here. Josh, is everything set?
Yeah.
All right. So, thanks so much. So now we're going to get started with our very first panel of this 5th annual Frontiers of Prevention International Forum. And we're starting off with a panel on the global assault on LGBTQ+ rights. This panel was inspired by several different things. The first being the very obvious increase that I think we're seeing globally on the targeting of LGBTQ+ populations that's coinciding with the rise of nationalist leaders, far-right leaders, and democratic backsliding, and LGBTQ people being really at the forefront of and often like the first targets or the of a lot of the violent rhetoric and divisive rhetoric in these societies. And it's also inspired by a project that really started at UK-based NGO protection approaches, and we have Farida, who's representing Protection Forces. Kate is also here, Kate Ferguson. They began a project several years ago called Queering Atrocity Prevention that really is highlighting the absence of an LGBTQ+ lens when it comes to thinking about risks and resilience and mass atrocities around the world. So we wanted to foreground that work, and also we're so excited to have with us Frank Mugisha, who's receiving the Nadia Rubaii Award, who obviously for decades has been working in one of the most difficult contexts globally when it comes to LGBTQ+ rights. So we wanted to foreground that by creating this panel that looks at how this struggle is the same and how it's different in different regions around the world. So we very specifically brought together people who are doing work in different regions so that we can have a conversation about what that work looks like, what are the commonalities across these regions, what are the challenges that we're having, what are the successes that we're seeing, and what are the lessons that can be shared more broadly. So I want to just quickly introduce these 4 panelists, and then I'll kick things off with a question that will hopefully just lead to us having a conversation with each other. So immediately to my left is Yarrow Walker-Brown, who is the founder of the Southern Tier Transgender Advocacy, which was established in 2018. They worked previously as a consultant for the New York Transgender Advocacy Group and its founder, Kiara St. James. They're also frequently a contributor to events with Julie Gray Owens and her organization, Gender Equality New York, including participating in the Transgender Day of Visibility Artist Showcase. And I'm really happy to be able to showcase or to bring here and highlight the voice of how this struggle is also a very local struggle in the Binghamton, New York area. The Southern Tier is the part of New York that we're in, for those of you who are unfamiliar. So this is what the Southern Tier Trans Advocacy is really coming from right here. Next to Yarrow is Farida Akram Mustafa, who joins us from the London-based NGO Protection Approaches, where she manages and coordinates Protection Approaches' Queering Atrocity Prevention Program, which looks at LGBTQI+ groups' unique risks and vulnerabilities to mass atrocities, and the ways in which programmatic interventions and risk frameworks can respond to them efficiently and swiftly in pursuit of safer and more inclusive societies. Next to Farida is Mauricio Coutinho, who's a public policy and human rights consultant and researcher from Uruguay. He has completed projects in the fields of human rights policy, public official training, and evaluation of international gender-focused NGOs. Since 2019, he's been engaging in education and research efforts focusing on prevention and LGBTQI+ rights. He's also an experienced human rights activist with a focus on LGBTQI+ persons and Afro-descendants. And finally, we have Frank Mugisha, who is a prominent advocate for LGBTI rights, a respected human rights champion, and an anti-violence advocate. He's the executive director of Sexual Minorities Uganda, or SMUG, the largest and leading organization of the LGBTI movement in Uganda. He's also founded Icebreakers Uganda, an organization created as a support network for LGBTI Ugandans who are out or in the process of coming out. Thank you all for being here. So maybe we can just begin by, I'll just throw out a question and whoever would like to start can you just start by talking a little bit about what are the biggest risks that LGBTQI+ communities are facing at the moment in the places where you're working, and how through your work are you responding to those risks? Who'd like to start?
I could start.
Thank you, Frank. Will you just pass down the microphone and there's the power button, just hold that down.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. As introduced, I'm from Mugisha from Uganda. Very happy to be here. For Uganda, I mean, the risks are a lot, I can say. But at the moment, the major risk is the constant recriminalization of homosexuality, the constant introduction of anti-gay legislations. And so, as we try to work on programming, supporting community, changing hearts and minds, we're always pulled back to fight legislation. So that limits the space that we have to be able to do any other work around supporting community, because then we spend all the efforts in responding to crisis. And with introduction of anti-gay legislation, it comes with violence, discrimination. So we find the movement spends so much time on supporting safety and protection for the community. And what are we doing now? We are doing a lot of strategic education that is aimed at, one, making the courts aware that all these legislations are against our constitution and international law. And then number two is trying to start the process of making sure that we arrive at that point where many countries are, where homosexuality has been criminalized and there is equality. And then we are also spending a lot of time in providing safety and protection to communities and highlighting the dangers of this legislation, not only for Uganda, but for other countries in Africa. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Gary, for the generous introduction. And it's wonderful to be among such wonderful expertise. So we're a UK-based NGO. You know, the climate around LGBT rights at the moment, particularly trans rights, is, for lack of a better word, awful. And our work has been focusing on trying to counter that, but also improving UK's contributions to prevention worldwide. And most recently, our work has focused on understanding queer risks to mass violence in Latin America and also East and Southeast Europe in particular. We've actually collaborated with Mauricio on some of the research in Latin America. And in Europe, I've been doing most of that. And I think it's interesting to hear you speak, Frank, because unfortunately, it sounds like there are a lot of commonalities across different regions to different degrees, but it sounds like the roots of violence are very similar. In East and Southeast Europe, for example, we see, again, very different forms of legislative targeting that run the gamut from the very short end of the spectrum, as we've seen, for example, in Russia most recently, the designation of LGBT rights organizations as extremists, for example. And before that, the introduction of anti-propaganda laws that restrict completely the dissemination or creation of any forms of LGBT rights-related cultural products. Then we also see kind of on the more, I think, covert maybe end of the spectrum, the repealing and blocking of different rights protections across different countries. And kind of even the sharp, I think, end of the spectrum is not only restricted to maybe the usual suspects, I think of Russia, for example. But I think recently there was also an attempt at introducing a foreign agent law in Georgia, for example. It was eventually struck down, but it sounds that kind of the roots are quite similar across different geographies. The designation of queer people as foreign, as immoral, as a threat to children in many cases, unfortunately. And not only does that directly undermine security, but it also sends kind of a wider message to populations that these groups might be easier to target, that again, they're a threat to society, which has its own implications for potentially rising hate speech, potentially rising hate crime, which has its own, again, implications for atrocity risks in that way. I think in addition to legislative targeting, what we see in Europe is also kind of acute forms of violence that relate to, for example, the particular targeting of gender non-conforming people, and also the use of state surveillance, which I was quite surprised to hear is a reality in East and Southeast Europe, and particularly came up, I think, in Georgia and Montenegro. Which is a familiar kind of scene with where I'm from Egypt, for example, but it was quite interesting to see that again, the same patterns, I think, are recurring in different places. Yeah, I think within the regions that we work in, that's where researchers talk about. Mauricio can probably speak more to the versus in Latin America, I think.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation, and it's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to this conversation where we are going to have and the experience we're going to share. Yeah, I'm also listening to Frank and Farida. Yes, we have common threads in the case of Latin America. We for some time now, if we just talk about Latin America and the Caribbean, we don't have any country that has open criminalization of LGBTQ identities. But we do have, and the 33 activists we talked to for the consultations part of the project we are in, to develop or to improve a set of indicators to embed in prevention frameworks to include the LGBTQ perspective and the perspective of violence based on gender identity, sexual orientation, and sex characteristics. What the first thread they think of is the anti-rights groups, which are also behind this backlash philosophy we are seeing pushed and actually passed in Uganda, in Russia, and tabled and proposed in some parliaments in Latin America already. So this is like the most prominent thread that they bring, which is also mentioned by the international multilateral institutions in Latin America too, like the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. And this is also a source of concern because it's at the foundation of all the other forms. It's fueling all the other forms of violence that we see against LGBTQ persons, and it's growing and growing in the world. And these actors also are getting more and more political power, and are getting more and more representatives at very high ranking positions. So this is a big source of concern, including digital violence, which is pervasive now in Latin America. Another big threat that's still perceived in the region is as a threat is the prevalent prejudice of public officials, anti-LGBTQ prejudice, which produces real and daily barriers of access to rights. Even in contexts where you have full legal equality, you have policies in place, you have institutions that are supposed to protect LGBTQ rights, these officials block access to healthcare, to education, to social security, in these subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. So that's another source of concern, which kind of ties into this prevalent prejudice flowing through social media. Another element which is very characteristic of Latin America, which has historically been the most violent region in the world, is the context of criminal violence and illegal armed groups and conflict areas. Whenever we see these realities of like widespread violence, either by gangs, maras in Central America, or by political armed groups in Colombia, the cartels throughout the region, the LGBTQ populations are way more targeted. They are intensely targeted. They suffer these very like exemplary killings, you know, with extreme forms of brutality, with corpses exposed on the street, so left on spots to be seen. And this is perceived as a way to discipline the rest of the community in the territories that they are trying to control, right? And there is this feeling that the ideologies or the values of these criminal organizations or these illegal political armed groups incorporate high doses of sexism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia as well. So that's, we've had our colleague Marcela Sanchez has just presented a report produced by Colombia Universal at the Security Council on this issue, which is quite relevant. Another element that will probably come up is the families and the community, the immediate communities, the neighborhoods, not being protective spaces for LGBTQ persons. The activists we talk to still perceive a lot of intrafamilial violence, expulsion of youth, especially trans persons, and also the encouragement of the so-called conversion therapies, to which some, especially teenagers, are encouraged to do, or in some cases forced to undergo. So I would say that those are some of them. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to say I'm beyond thrilled and humbled to be on a panel with such courageous advocates and doing the work that you're doing in the regions that you're doing. That's pretty amazing to me. So in the United States and in areas that are very conservative leaning, as unfortunately this area still seems to be, we're not quite at the point of overt violence. It's still more overt, but it's slowly tipping in that direction. The things that I usually try to address, and even though my organization explicitly in the name says transgender, I like to think of myself as a champion for the latter half of the acronym that sometimes gets ignored. You could ask most people on the street what the I and the A in the acronym stand for, and they wouldn't even know, intersex and asexual, or have a concrete definition of those. So yeah, I champion those too. I participated in events around my intersex identity as well as my trans identity. So the erasure is the big point that I focus on, putting out there that we exist, first of all, because some people are even unaware of that. And second of all, are unique concerns. You can go, particularly even in my case, you can go your entire life not even knowing you're intersex because the medical community doesn't even want to address it. Same thing with asexuality is still by a lot of people considered a medical condition, either physiological or psychological. So I want to put that out there that you know, these identities exist and they're real and they deserve some time in the spotlight as well. Definitely, I have experienced the, I'm sorry, what was your name? Frida. Working in the UK, that the so-called gender critical movement has leaked onto social media and is brazenly fascist in some cases, allying publicly with white supremacist neo-Nazi groups and everything. And they want to control the conversation around not just, they like to zero in on transgender identity, but they just as much intersex and asexual identity, they'll target them too. So yes, while it is kind of on the so-called lighter end of violence around here, it's still, the potential is unfortunately still out there. I mean, just doing my organizational work, I've fielded personal threats, so I mean, it exists. And there are also issues that seem to be discussed intracommunally, but don't often crack out into the larger conversation that I wanted to address. There's been a lot of discussion around, some call it anti-trans masculinity and some call it transandrophobia, but whatever you want to call it, there are unique conversations to be had about bias and violence against transmasculine individuals. We're seeing an uptick. Still, the leading victims of violence have been transgender women of color, but we've been unfortunately seeing an uptick too in anti-transmasculine violence with Next Benedict and a few other victims that have become high profile. So there's that, and there's again that I mentioned bias against the asexual community, acephobia. People won't even believe you when you raise the issue that in some states in the United States, your marriage is not legally binding unless it is consummated, as in there's sexual activity. And other things like corrective rape or marital rape are things that can occur in asexual relationships. I continuously remind people that even though it's often been erased, the case of Bianca Devins, who was a young influencer from Utica, New York, who was killed and then had photos of her corpse thrown across social media without the family's consent, was situated around the fact that she identified as asexual, and when she refused to have sex with her, the man who was obsessed with her, he killed her. And then the insult injury of the, disseminating the photos of her corpse on social media. So that's mainly what I work on with my organization, to speak out against issues like that.
Okay, this is not working. Okay, thank you all so much. So, no, yeah, thank you. So I said that like one of the inspirations for this project was this queering atrocity prevention project that Protection Approaches is really spearheading. I'd love if Farida, can you talk a little bit about that? Because one thing that in particular that I found, there's an amazing report that they released that's available on the Protection Approaches website, and I encourage everyone to look at this. But one of the findings from this report that led to this program is the idea that in so many cases, queer communities, LGBTQI+ communities are sort of the canary in the coal mine. They can often be the first group targeted. There's something about the threat, the creation of a construction of threat around queer communities that we're seeing in many, many contexts around the world. So I'm curious, Farida, if you can talk a little bit about what are you finding as you're continuing on this program? And I'm curious for all of you, like, where is this idea of threat coming from, and why so often in all of these different contexts or queer communities, why are they the easy threat? Why are they so often painted in this idea of a threat to stability, to community, to family, to all of these ideas?
Thanks, Gary. I mean, as you mentioned, kind of the targeting of queer communities has tended to be the canary in the coal mine ahead of mass violence. It tends to be the communities that are marginalized, minoritized, the fringes of society, whose lives are unfortunately less breathable, essentially, that are, in a way, convenient test cases for mass violence down the line. As to why queer communities in particular, what came up time and time again, I think, in a lot of the consultations that we've had, we try as much as possible to base where the program goes based on where local civil society organizations in the regions that we work, what they deem as the identity-based risks that are facing their communities. And we try as much as possible to ensure that our advocacy and the outcomes that come from the project are informed by that. And despite kind of the difficult context in the UK, to ensure that we can contribute to hopefully better contributions from the UK, at least from a harm reduction perspective, given the current context. In terms of why queer communities, they are, it seems to me like a convenient target in a way that disrupting some of the more traditional or foundational aspects of societies as we know them today. Whether it means that they disrupt, for example, some of the heteronormative ways in which societies are constructed today. And we're finding that a lot of these identity-based risks that start perhaps on a smaller scale in the form of whether it's, again, legislative targeting or even the upticks in hate crime, for example, or upticks in hate speech that's based in nationalist, religious roots. It tends to be a foreshadowing, essentially, of the targeting of both queer communities and also wider communities. And I think being attuned to some of those early warning signs is important for the security and safety of the queer community, because if you're not aware of at least the very early signs of that targeting, then people only become aware towards the very end of that trajectory. But it's also, I think, as queer lives tend to be, unfortunately, less breathable in many parts of the world, the violence that they face can foreshadow violence towards other communities as well. And what we're trying to do from our perspective is to ensure that some of those early warning signs, identity-based risks that face queer communities are monitored by various state and non-state actors that prioritize prevention of peace in their foreign policy. So it's in a way an entry point to ensure that whether it's the research that is done in relation to anti-queer violence or the understanding of what early warning signs for mass violence are, that they take a queer inclusive lens, because that is protected for queer communities in and of itself, but also has merit for the wider prevention, I think, of mass violence.
So that answers your question.
Yeah, the why is a big question, right? I mean, it comes up in every conversation we have, every conversation in activist spaces that we see regionally with our colleagues in research areas, research designs. And I think, in a way, LGBTQ communities are just the same and different as any other minority group that has been used for centuries as a tool for political gain, basically. We are a numerical minority. We are a global minority, so in times of globalization, the anti-LGBTQ speech works absolutely everywhere, even when the LGBTQ existence is denied, like in some Arab states. For example, and it's happening more and more, where it is said that these people don't exist, and at the same time we need to persecute them. It's like a crazy idea. So we are already a numerical, very small minority. And the other element is that there is prevailing prejudice that can be leveraged against our minority for political gain. So across the globe, we will see varying degrees of sexism and LGBTQ phobia that can be, those flames can be fanned to group the rest of society around other values, including anti-LGBTQ prejudice. So just to give you an example, in Uruguay, we've had legal equality for LGBTQ persons now for more than a decade. We had equal marriage law passed in 2013. We've had 2 gender identity laws passed. That's one in 2018. The support for equal marriage, the acceptance of equal marriage, since in 10 years, has reached like around 60%. And we're talking about a secular country with a more of a century of separation between the church and state. So there's still at least that 40% of people who have this like feeling when they are confronted with the image of 2 men or 2 women being married, or the idea of these people, few people having a family, right? So it's there. Even in the most equal societies, there's prejudice, and political actors and political movements around the world know they can use that and tie that to the advances in women's rights and this funding this or encouraging this perception of they've had too much. Women and LGBTQ people and they've had too much. So we keep getting grouped, the minorities keep getting grouped as to give more power to that prejudice. So that's the perception I'm getting.
Thank you. I'll add on. What we've examined in Uganda, looking at the queer community, the queer and transgender community in Uganda, which is not so visible. So what the anti-gay movement and activist movement use is the fear of the unknown, because then it's very easy to spread misinformation and disinformation about a community that's not visible. They can come and lie about anything, people will believe it, because then Ugandans will be scared, this group of people that they don't know of. But because they are told that this group of people is bringing Western ideologies, this group of people want to take all your cultural values, this group of people is abusing children. So then the LGBT becomes an easy target. And so what they do is wipe out society against the community. And then politicians take advantage of that. Because the politicians know this is now their chance to use LGBTQ persons or to scapegoat the LGBT community for all their failures. That's what we're seeing. And again, because the country is very religious, and so many countries in Africa are very religious, it becomes very easy for this to be spread through religion. And what we've seen that every time a country in Africa tries to introduce an anti-gay legislation, there's something that's happening politically. They're trying to divert the attention of the public. And again, it's mostly about money. It's mostly about how much money the conservative, extreme Christian groups can raise, and then from their churches here, and then go to Africa, and start spreading the hatred. Because then they come here and say, we're raising funds to go to Africa on a mission to do work with the African community, but then they package that with the hatred. And behind that, anti-LGBTQ statements and ideologies and laws, I spoke to. Behind that, it's anti-reproductive health, anti-women, and other things. So they use the LGBT community that they can easily weaponize against society. But behind that, if you see what the anti-rights groups are doing in Uganda, they're only using the LGBT issues as the front. But behind the scene, they're promoting all these other very many extreme ideologies.
Yes, I would definitely echo what the panelists have been saying. When you were speaking about how, the conservatives are exporting their hatred, that was going through my mind is, if anyone's familiar with the culture war stuff that goes on with conservatives in this country, you get very familiar with a handful of names because they pop up over and over again. And one of these such figures is Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire. And I kept thinking, what does he do when he makes that transphobic so-called documentary? He goes to Africa and he talks to the locals, and they all stand around laughing about transgender people. I haven't watched it, of course. I wouldn't, so I don't even believe I've seen the whole clip. But yes, that's what he decides to do. The culture wars in this country operate in the exact same way. They take that thread of discomfort and they yank on it, and then they weaponize the discomfort. They find that little, they can put their foot in the door, and then they can throw the door wide open. You'll notice how they focus on things that people can find completely understandable, like, there's a discomfort around transgender women using women's facilities. They weaponize that. They weaponize, I've seen an increase of them using things like the furry community. Oh, look at these weirdos running around in costumes, the anti-drag laws that are sweeping the nation. That's what they find it easy to spread, which is what is an abjectly hateful and fascist message in sort of a packaged way. And another thing that is on the very edge of that tipping point that I mentioned towards actual violence happening is there's a TikTok account that's called Libs, as in liberals, of TikTok, which is allowed to stay on the platform despite the fact that its content has directly resulted in real life violence. Bomb threats, especially bomb threats at hospitals, bomb threats at, or most recently Planet Fitness, because a woman was banned for life because she took pictures of a transgender woman in the bathroom and disseminated them on the internet. Well, Chaya Raddick, who is the founder, operator of Libs of TikTok, will basically just go around finding, as the internet parlance is cringe, and then blowing it up to a massive scale, and before long, before you know, there's actual real life threats of violence. So, yeah, it's deliberate. They find that criminal discovered, and then they magnify it until it's completely gotten out of control.
One of the things that strikes me, there are a lot of commonalities that we're hearing among the experiences, but one thing that does strike me as a difference is the context in which you're all working, because in some cases, like in the UK, like in New York State, like in Rubaii, we've got places where there's legislation that is seemingly like indicating an openness to queer communities, a legislative idea of equality, but then there's still social tension, as Mauricio pointed out, with people who disagree with that legislative base. But then, like in Uganda or in like the other places in the US, maybe more southern states, you've got like you don't even have there's not even the facade of protection or a desire to protect or think about queer communities as equal. So I'm curious, like, what are the different strategies that you have to use in those different contexts, and what have you found as like successful strategies for dealing with what appears like two different challenges based on where you're working?
Well, I would just say the easiest thing to do is to cut through the stereotypes. You know, all of these, like I mentioned, the culture war stuff, they all operate off of this boogeyman that they've created of what queer people and the queer community is about. The latest trend is groomers, which grooming is supposed to mean taking advantage of and gaslighting and psychologically tooling a young child into sexual abuse. And now it's been twisted to mean hanging a pride flag in a elementary school classroom. So if you can just cut through the stereotypes and actually get to the bottom line, I go around saying things like, you want to know what the transgender agenda is. I'm a person and I want to be happy and live my life. So I go around saying things like that in the face of, trans people want to brainwash your kids into having surgery to mutilate their genitals or their healthy bodies or whatever. I also have a habit of saying that if you care so much about the mutilation of children's genitalia, then why aren't you speaking out about intersex children? They always have some excuse about that. So yeah, it's I think that the biggest tool of undermining this propaganda is the truth. The truth of, behind the queer community is we're just regular human beings, and that's all we want is to be left alone, rather than, like I said, the manufactured boogeyman.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think there is, again, listening to everyone speak, a common thread of what kind of misinformation and lack of visibility, I think, can do to social perceptions and then resulting levels of violence. I mean, thinking of kind of the legislative piece is something that we've thought a lot about at protection approaches, because in some of the countries where we've been working through these kind of basic legal protections from discrimination or kind of the provision of civil partnership or same-sex marriage is, technically a reality. But when you speak to activists in these contexts, their lived experience tends to be quite different in terms of the violence that they experience on a daily basis, and that the existence of these laws is not necessarily a sign that queer lives are better or safer.
Like I think of an example that came up in one of the consultations, particularly in Georgia. It's always an example that's kind of the top of my head these days, which is that the state, I believe, introduced some semblance of protective legislation from discrimination, but against the backdrop of a pending EU extension application that they were interested in kind of bolstering. And a lot of the activists were working with that to ensure that the legal protections improve. And they're kind of using that as an advocacy tool to make sure that at the very least, at the very basic level, you're able to have legal protections. But I think in situations where these legal protections are unfortunately not even there in the first place, or where the state is not even interested in any way, shape, or form in furthering LGBT rights, or even protecting from like the most basic forms of targeting. I think, again, listening to everyone speak, I think in relation to your question as well, Carrie, about why is it that the particular queer community perceives others, I think if we look at the actors that further anti-queer violence, they're also the same actors that are furthering all kinds of other violence. They're the ones, for example, in the UK that also want to make sure that asylum seekers, for example, are sent on a plane to Rwanda. They're the same people that further instill racist rhetoric within the UK. And I think in these contexts in particular, thinking what other movements can you partner with, who can you work with in country that shares your values, and that will be a useful ally for you, but also someone that you can support, agenda you can also support, and make sure that kind of the same sources that are impacting and exacerbating insecurity for different groups of people kind of face a sort of united front. I feel like in countries where there is less maybe openness or care from the state, no matter how much you shame them, no matter how much you try all kinds of different ways, that tends to be a way I think that can be a bit more productive. But I'd be keen to hear also from
I just wanted to piggyback off that with one other issue that I'm seeing, the whole canary in a coal mine thing. This country is also going the route of this insidious trend that I'm seeing come up more and more often is the guise of protecting children is being used as censorship. I cannot say enough. I keep telling my parents who watch the news and don't take in information outside of the mainstream news, and I keep saying to people in general, there is a bill that is being proposed that has bipartisan support that is called the Kids Online Safety Act. And despite that innocuous title, it is government censorship through and through. They want to do things such as mandate you uploading your government issued ID in order to use the internet, $200 fine for VPN usage, and they want to limit certain types of information, including LGBT information. Even though they're trying to amend that section of the bill, the threat remains, as well as information about abortion. So I keep mentioning that to people because of how dangerous and the slippery slope into fascism that is happening in this country is being utilized through little back doors like that, like keeping kids safe. Meanwhile, it's total outright censorship. And also the pervasive ideal of this I don't even know what to call it. The society in general seems to be regressing into sex negativity, and they're using that to their advantage by saying that drag is a perversion, cross-dressing is a perversion, transgender people is a perversion, it's sexual abuse to children, and they're also using that against things in certain states, legislation is being passed, about, pornographic websites, you're no longer allowed to access them. And, it's plain as day what they're going to do, if you follow it to its logical end. They're going to declare all, queer content as, sexually perverse or too adult to be accessed. And so, they're going to essentially put a wall in between queer youth and any sort of valuable information about their identities or health or anything of that nature. And, yeah, this culture war stuff, they're using it to their advantage to, in some states, they want to effectively ban transgender people from public life. I saw a bill proposed somewhere about, trans people will not be allowed within, a mile of a school. So, I mean, it's something we need to recognize is running away from us. It's getting worse and worse by the day. And we need to, by recognizing it, we need to put a stop to it.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to agree on the concept that Yaro brought of weaponizing discomfort. This is a key concept here. Weaponizing male discomfort because of gender equality, weaponizing economic discomfort, weaponizing anxiety, weaponizing precariousness-based discomfort. This is a key element that can be used, and some activists and some organizations are using to counter these speeches. And then back to Carrie's question, the strategies vary, of course, depending on the context. In Latin America, we have a long tradition of advocacy before multilateral organizations, so that you can get agreements that are binding to the states, and then you can get legislation, and then you can get public policy, like that long strategy, indirect strategy that's still valid and is still being used intensely by the movements in the region. But then even if you have the laws, you still have problems at the level of public policy. So other strategies that I've seen the movements take is at national level, try to engage with every public body, every institution that has a mandate that includes at least a bit overlap with LGBT rights protection, engage with them, participate, develop partnerships. So for example, in Brazil, many municipal educational systems are really open to working with LGBTQ rights activists, so that they develop joint programs. So activists and just consultants are hired by the systems to talk to train teachers, to talk to students, to develop policies for educational centers. This happens also in Argentina, this happens in Uruguay, in many other places. The same with healthcare centers. There are experiences of joint partnerships where, for example, one agency provides the funds, the Ministry of Health agrees to develop the program, and then a couple of healthcare centers with the funding and the guidance work with an LGBTQ-led organization to sensitize the personnel, develop protocols to deal, for example, with trans folks coming to clinics, so as to guarantee the right to health. So there are many of these experiences, which of course take a lot of effort, and it's like a one-to-one basis, of course. And then also what we've seen is like building alliances and coalitions with other movements outside of the LGBTQ movements. And of course, the feminist movement is like the first ally and the first and the closest ally. But also in some countries, this is not across Latin America, but in many countries, there are very interesting alliances with workers' unions, with what we call the traditional social movements in the region. The union movement, the workers' movements across the region, the student unions as well. So in many countries, especially when trying to push for legislation, for legislative reform, these alliances are worked in a way to show that it's an awful expression, but it's not just us the freaks here. Look, we have a partnership with the traditional workers, male-dominated worker unions who are supporting this agenda as well, like to show that this is a cross-sectional issue for society. That has worked as well. Then on the issue of countering these speeches to social media, I really don't see this far. I don't see any articulated and successful strategy to tackle that. It's like you get this feeling when you talk to activists, like it's like we're still trying to see how we can deal with this. There are no, I think, I don't know what you think, but there's no consensus at this point beyond just trying to resist and not replicate and try to counter fake news and appeal to the regulation mechanisms of Facebook and Twitter and former Twitter now X. But I don't see a strategy, like fully developed strategy to deal with that, and it's a pressing issue as I think everyone will agree.
Thank you. For Uganda, our strategies have been depending on the situation, rather really contextual. One, mobilizing local civil society. That has worked in a way that we live in a very authoritarian regime in my country, where we have a president who has been president for many years, and there is shrinking civic space. So for us, who want civil society and say, look, we're all under attack, so you should work with us. And we formed coalitions. So when we first had the Kill the Hate bill 10 years ago, we formed a coalition of civil society. And the same thing has happened now from the coalition of civil society. It hasn't been easy this time around because of the propaganda and misinformation that even some of our civil society partners who are on human rights believe is misinformation. But also they are worried of being further attacked. So getting civil society has worked. And then the other is that what I mentioned, litigation. So we try to do litigation not only around the anti-gay legislation, but also on other issues. For example, we were able to hold accountable a newspaper that was exposing LGBTQ persons, and we won the case and it was shut down. We were able to hold accountable police who raided my colleague's home, and we were successful in that. So we do litigation that is aimed at creating little protections for the LGBT community, but also work a lot around policy reforms. So recently, when the anti-gay legislation was introduced, we did a lot of lobbying. And unfortunately, we have to do this through international partners. So working with the Global Fund, PEPFAR, and the rest. Our Ministry of Health was able to issue a circular saying LGBTQ persons should still access services, even though there is an anti-gay legislation. But what happens on the ground really is different. Even if the circular is issued, there's still discrimination. And then secondly, our Directorate of Public Prosecutions, who is in charge of creating a charge if someone's been arrested, issued another circular saying the police should not charge anyone under the anti-gay legislation unless they are consulted with the office. Because we're getting people getting charged with a lot, they just find you and you're suspected to be gay, they arrest you and they charge you under the Anti-Homosexuality Act. That's how we ended up having someone being charged with a death penalty at this moment. So that circular came about. That's because of the lobbying that we did. And then strategic litigation also has been holding accountable the same people who are erasing LGBTQ human rights here in the US. For example, we went to court in Massachusetts and sued an American evangelical. But what that did for us was exposing this exploitation of hatred. And what we've seen, the outcome of that is it has at least limited the number of extreme Christian evangelicals who come to Uganda and to do this publicly. They still come, but at least they don't do it as much as they were doing before. And we've seen some of them coming to Uganda, then coming back to the US and issuing statements. Saying, oh, we don't support the law, or we support parts of the law, but not everything. So that means that exposing and naming and shaming in a way is working. And then the other thing has been exposing the violence itself, working with the community and making sure that the LGBT community in Uganda is resilient and being able to respond to the violence by documenting all these violations. Because when we come to partners or we're negotiating with government, they ask, where's the evidence? So we present this violence, we present this evidence in terms of the violations that have been documented. And finally, the tool that has really worked the most for Uganda, and the reason we use this is because the anti-race and anti-gay movement, especially in countries like Uganda, they have impunity because of religion, because the country is so faithful, and they are close friends with the politicians. So they can do almost anything they want. They get red carpets. You will be surprised that the people who are not even known here in the US will arrive in Uganda and they will be welcomed by the president because they are Christians. You will be surprised that the groups that have been named as hate groups here in the US are welcomed and celebrated in Uganda and welcomed by the president. So what we've done is get the international community to hold their own citizens accountable, but to also push back and hold Ugandan politicians who are co-conspirators in these groups accountable. For example, we've seen the US respond by putting visa bans on those promoting gross violations with LGBTQ persons in Uganda. The World Bank recently responded to the anti-gay legislation by saying we're going to withhold a loan to Uganda because we do not believe you're going to be able to implement our projects properly if you're not inclusive and diverse. And for the first time ever, we are involved working with the World Bank in the country and the government to make sure we create mitigating procedures that will enable LGBTQ persons not to be discriminated. So some of the international response is working, whereas we've seen that some hasn't worked, but at least we've seen that some has worked.
Thanks so much. So I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. Yeah, Rhiannon. Is that, this one's not working. Is there another microphone here? Yeah, good.
Hi everyone, Nadia from Stanford University. Thank you so much for this fascinating panel. I learned so much from all of you. Yara, something you said about following it to the logical conclusion of banning all queer porn. I can't see girl on girls for cis het male gays ever being banned. So I mean, like maybe that's, I don't know, it just further highlights so much of the issues that are at stake here as to like what the people and how people to be okay if it's self-serving. But my question for the whole panel. We touched on it a little bit, but I'm really curious to hear about the digital violence specific to the LGBTQAI+ communities that you find, whether it's across social media, diaspora kind of whipping up a lot of this kind of hate crime within international communities, and even I've heard of apps like Grindr being weaponized to target vulnerable populations as well. Thank you.
I got stuck. I think for Uganda it has been the worst. But also on the other hand, we use social media. The social media is the only tool we have as activists to use, provide any kind of education on changing hearts and minds. But on the other hand, for instance, in 2022, social media was used by the anti-race groups to weaponize the Ugandan society. Rather, not even weaponize, radicalize the Ugandan society against the LGBT community. And that is how we saw the anti-gay legislation coming out. We had misinformation and disinformation on TikTok, WhatsApp groups, and I received death threats on my Twitter. In fact, that led to the government issuing arrest warrants for me because of the misinformation that was happening on social media, and also led to the shutting down of my organization. For dating apps, we have security agencies going on Grindr and pretending, and then luring LGBTQ persons and extorting money from them, torturing them, kidnapping, and also arresting LGBTQ persons. And actually raised most of these concerns with many of these digital platforms.
Very similar in the case of Latin America. In the case of dating apps, it's a phenomenon that's starting, the targeting, especially of gay men through dating apps. We've had cases reported in Venezuela, Peru, Mexico, Brazil, of men being lured and then robbed, beaten, and in some cases killed. There are already cases of killings. Odore was one of the previous cases. So that seems to be like a global trend for targeted violence. And then through social media, what we see is on the one hand, trying to neutralize LGBTQ oriented messages, like for example, an organization issues a press release or a statement, and then those posts are bombarded with comments and are shared, in a way that it's the whole dissemination of it is just ruined. Let's say it's really blocked. So that's one strategy, and the other thing, and it connects to what Frank was saying, the targeting of activists. The posts are identified, and then people are vilified online, and some of this violence spills over to the real world, so to speak. So some people have decided to just shut their accounts and not tweet anymore, especially if they are highly visible actors. And of course, this is blocking many organizations from using social media properly. And then, of course, what you see is that any news media content posted on social media touches even lightly and indirectly on LGBTQ rights. It's flooded by comments and is used. It's like repacked, cropped, and edited and repacked and used as a content to spread hate. This is very prevalent in the region.
Yeah, I mean, digital targeting is definitely, it's a big problem. It's something that I think I first came across working and living in Egypt, where it started very similar to what Frank was saying, as security forces actively searching for queer people on apps like Grindr, and actively entrapping those people, and then using maybe communications that they've had on some of these applications as evidence against them in different courts of law, and some people have actually been prosecuted because of this. But what has started to happen over time is that as this is state-driven, is that organized criminal gangs have started to take advantage of that they have started, and not started, it's been going for unfortunately quite some time, actively entrapping and kidnapping queer people for purposes of extortion, blackmail, acquiring money. And again, that's what you see either with the continuity of the impunity for those crimes, or when it's state-led, those actors know that unfortunately they will be able to get away with it if not celebrated for it and encouraged to do it. And I was very struck by the fact that in our work together, Mauricio, it came up in Latin America as an emerging trend. It's very happening in Uganda. In Europe as well, it came up particularly in Russia. And I think in a couple of other Eastern and Southeast European countries where people are actively, again, almost hunted on dating apps. And yeah, again, similar patterns of being blackmailed, of being, so I think even speaking to consultees, it's something that they find particularly difficult to counter. Because it's unfortunately, again, with impunity, there are very little tools, I think, to counter that. And with the issue of kind of increasing hate speech on social media, like countering that requires an enormous amount of resource and time that a lot of these smaller CSOs that work directly with communities and kind of survivors of these incidents just do not have. And a lot of what I've been told was, we have just deprioritized dealing with this because particularly hate speech on social media, because we just do not have the resources for it. And there are so many forms of like immediate action, physical targeting of people, that we tend to focus more on kind of the fire right immediately for us. But it's unfortunate that it sounds like it's very much a part of kind of different geographies and patients.
I'm going to tell you about a website, and hopefully nobody in this room has ever had the misfortune of knowing about. It's called Kiwi Forums. It's a forum which deliberately seeks out either transgender or neurodiverse individuals, oftentimes both, and essentially harasses them to suicide. And it's been tied to several real-life suicides, and I am on it and have a thread of, the last time I checked, about 1,500 pages of just attacking my identity, and they have my full legal name, my parents' full legal names, all kinds of personal information, and the police can do absolutely nothing about it because it is completely anonymous. I know people who are queer business owners that cannot run their businesses because of the false claims that are disseminated because of this website. And there was an individual I once knew semi-well. I spoke to her a few times. Her name was, I believe it was Chloe Savini or Chloe something or another. You can find her quite easily if you Google game developer or dies as a result of Kiwi Farms or something like that. She self-immolated after being harassed for years. So this is just one example of the systematic and frankly socially sanctioned violence that happens to queer individuals like myself and others who are business owners or activists or in any nature. They find something that they consider, again, cringe, which is the social parlance of the day, which means something that they find embarrassing or that they can target, such as an individual's appearance. They don't consider me a real trans person because I haven't done the traditional transition route. I'm trans-masked, but I present very feminine. So they'll just absolutely run that into the ground and just go for years. And as far as I know, they've been doing this to me since about 2017. And again, this happens completely with impunity because every time a website bumps them off their server, they find a new one. I don't know how much longer it can legally go on, but the fact that it can exist and operate, do things like this, when it's fairly well known in online queer social justice spaces, it just boggles the mind. So hopefully legislation catches up with things like this, but given how things have been going, I can only think that it's going to get worse.
On the legal thing, like it seems like Frank, for example, has been sort of strategic and smart with getting legal redress, whether it's here or in Africa. Is that being done enough in countries like the US and the UK? Like, is anyone taking Rishi Sunak to court for, I mean, it's a serious question that, like, if there are legal frameworks, are they being employed enough? Is it about resources for doing that, or is it sort of about thinking outside the box a bit too?
Well, I mean, I would certainly love to take these people to court for defamation if I had the money, but, you know, again, the legislation hasn't caught up with, enough of this. It was only very recently in that New York State, had laws against what is known as, revenge porn, which is disseminating, say, like an ex-partner's, intimate photos, without their consent. I had a friend who was targeted by the Walking While Trans law, which is, if you're not familiar, you can be charged with soliciting or engaging in prostitution just by walking down the street. So I would hope that things start to progress in the direction that some of this can be addressed, but it just seems to, it gets worse before it gets better. Like I mentioned before, the libs of TikTok and actual bomb threats and things like that. And pretty much nothing's done. In fact, she's enabled by X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to my biggest knowledge, I don't think anyone has taken Rishi Sunak to court yet, but I might be mistaken. I mean, I think the UK has quite a vibrant civil society kind of group that is working more domestically. I think of organizations like Stonewall, for example. But I think it's important to recognize the degree to which a lot of these organizations are under duress at the moment. Like I think recently of the closure of Mermaids, for example, I believe they were closed, which was an organization working to support trans people in the UK. Stonewall is also under a huge amount of stress and demonization kind of in the public sphere as well. So I think it comes back to that point of resilience and how do we make sure that our movements remain resilient in the face of these threats and risks that they face. So if some of those actors that are tasked with the protection of queer rights or further queer rights themselves are unable to kind of maybe sometimes sustain their operations or operate safely, even if like, and I mean in the most basic way of like operating safely at their own headquarters, operating safely and having their organizations not closed down. So I would hope that we see in the future, I think, more forms of holding people accountable. But at the moment, I think it's important to recognize the context in which a lot of these organizations are operating in a place that even like the UK that could be considered slightly more open than other contexts that we work in.
All right, one over here.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on a really important topic. I was wondering, and this partly has to do with what Mauricio said about the LGBTQ community essentially being similar to other minority communities in facing discrimination, hatred, etc. And then Farida was saying that similar people target LGBTQ communities and other communities like migrants. And I don't know if this question is relevant to the work that all of you do. Maybe I'm thinking particularly of the work that Protection Approaches does, Farida, because I'm thinking in terms of the broader context of atrocity prevention, and thinking about the trend that we've seen in some countries in Europe, particularly Western Europe, where you see far-right populist politicians using stated support, and here I want to say that it's not perhaps actual support, but stated support for both women's rights, but also LGBTQI rights, and using that as a political tool then to actually advocate for discrimination against other minority groups, including migrants, right, on the basis of race, but also religion. So I'm wondering, how do you take that into account in the work that you do? How does that complicate the work that you do around LGBTQI rights? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Kind of sometimes the furthering of LGBT rights or the perceived furthering of LGBT rights is seen as, or is used as a tool to discriminate against other populations or even prohibit them from having the safety and security and refuge that they often very much need. I think it's important to recognize where, again, this comes from. Is it really about wanting to protect queer communities? And I highly doubt that it is, because some of these same actors that say that they, for example, are looking to block migration to, keep their Western veneer of progressiveness, are quite possibly the same people that are furthering identity-based risk for populations in different ways, whether it's actively or passively, whether it's about introducing legislation or repealing ones that exist, or simply not paying attention to the concerns that are raised by queer communities. I think of a lot of, again, the conversations that we've had with people across Europe, and in many cases, a lot of the concerns or complaints that people bring forward to state authorities, I'm thinking of like active forms of targeting, like attacks on like queer gatherings, setting private flags on fire, threatening people with violence, doxing, and leaving people's data kind of online for others to again take advantage of. States don't really respond in many cases to a lot of these needs that people bring. They are deprioritized, belittled. They are seen as kind of, again, fringe issues that we don't have enough resources to tackle. And if it was really about that kind of protection of queer communities, that would not be the case, but it is the case. And that's even like on the, again, more, I want to say, like timid or meek side of the spectrum of exacerbated queer risk. This is not even to mention contexts where, for example, I think in the UK, for example, where queer people might stand at that intersection of being queer and migrants, and might be, for example, denied refuge or might be denied asylum. Again, like it does not conclude. Like you say that it's about protecting certain communities, but it almost never is. And I think something that recurs over and over again in our work at PA, and something that Kate always says, is that these risks, identity-based risks, exist in all kinds of places to different degrees. And again, listening to people speak today, like that sounds much more present than it is. So the argument of where, the protection, I think, of or violence against one community rarely leads to the protection of another, which is something, again, that recurs in a lot of our work is, I would take it with a grain of salt and be very suspicious about these arguments.
What I've noticed is that there's a clear link between anti-queer and especially anti-transgender attitudes and ableism, the attitude of oppression and discrimination against people with disabilities. A lot of times they take the angle of devaluing trans people as mentally ill, or using the angle of saying that transgender people are mentally ill, therefore we should not indulge the delusion that they are of a different gender than, or use their pronouns or anything like that. There's another angle that they approach, again, as I mentioned before, unique challenges faced by trans-masculine individuals is they, with trans-feminine individuals, they take the idea that they are invaders, predators, that sort of thing. They want to trample upon women's rights. The transmasculine individuals, they take the stance that they are being brainwashed, and being led astray. They are the victims. They are being, convinced, gaslighted into denying their, femaleness. Again, going back to the whole mutilating your bodies thing, taking the angle of, look at how this poor defenseless woman was convinced to hack off her breasts, things like that. With intersex people, they also use a backwards approach of insisting that they don't belong in the queer community because they're actually a medical condition, a disability, a genetic mutation, that sort of thing. And so they can't claim solidarity with the larger queer community because, they actually belong over here in the disabled community. So there's a lot of things like that. And two, using that weaponized discomfort that I mentioned before, they will target people who are both transgender and autistic by saying that they are being brainwashed into the transgender ideology. So, they take the idea that autistic people and their autonomy are being, manipulated by the transgender sort of thing. So that's something that the intersections between trans identity and disability, or intersex identity and disability, is something that need to be recognized too, and how it's being used against us.
Mauricio, Frank, any final words?
Yeah, just a short word.
Yeah, quickly.
Around this, going back to the track record of these actors who try to pink wash their xenophobia. If you look at their track record and you look at who their friends and allies are outside of their country or region, then you start seeing that there's like no consistency. Of course, just calling attention to this inconsistency does nothing to erode their power, but it's there. But I think the key here is about putting the focus on the scapegoating of a minority against the rest of society. So it's the same thing. So it's scapegoating the religious or the ethnic minorities and say they are to blame for the widespread LGBTQ phobia in society. I mean, LGBTQ phobia will start with migration and with the visibility of ethnic minorities in the countries. I think that's the point, and I think it's an opportunity actually to highlight this mechanism and to remind people that last year it was the LGBTQ groups that were the devil, and now it's these groups because they demonized the group that was the devil before. But it's just the same, and they will switch to a different group next year. So I think we should try, and I don't have any proposal on how to do that, no idea. But it is the mechanism of scapegoating minorities against the rest of society that we need to fight, to spot, and to call the attention of everyone to prevent the mechanism from being used over and over and over again to erode people's rights and erase their lives.
Frank, the last word.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think for me, it is the urgency of what is happening now, that the progressive movement is under attack, and look at this as a cross-cutting movement and a global issue as well. Like I mentioned earlier, in Uganda, they are using anti-LGBTQ laws, but I think that it's all these other extreme conservative ideologies. So once we look at that in that way and know that almost everyone's rights are under attack, and once we allow this gain momentum, it's going to be very difficult to reverse. So it's very urgent.
Please join me in thanking Garo, Farida, Mauricio, and Brian for the full panel. So we now have coffee just outside the room, and we'll start our next panel at 11:30 sharp. Thank you.